Welcome to Global VID, a podcast about original productions and international TV and film distribution. I'm your host, Eric Y. Lapointe, and we're about to learn how people in our industry are expanding their footprint and finding the right partners around the world. This show was created by Now Global and is also available as an audio format on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast application. Welcome, everyone, to this year's last episode of Global VID, our new podcast. If this is the first time you've listened in a while, our podcast has changed name from the VID podcast to Global VID. Many reasons for that. But this episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be taking a look back at the year that was 2020. And I'm here with an industry colleague from Montreal. His name is Conrad Buck, and he works for Stingray, but he also runs a new newsletter called The Bulletin, an industry newsletter. Conrad, how are you?
I'm very good. Yes, I'm really happy to be on your show, Eric. So
thanks.
It's always nice to chat with you.
And good morning. It is morning for us right now, and still in Montreal and still in British Columbia. Let's kick things off. Maybe just explain a little bit about what the Bulletin is and how to subscribe.
Last year, I was traveling a lot in the industry for work, and there was so much happening in broadcast and streaming. At the end of the week, I just didn't have enough time to catch up on what was going on in the news. And I thought, maybe there's an opportunity to put something out once a week that's more of a recap of the week. Summary of the news, things that people in the work in the streaming industry would be interested in reading. And I started off with just kind of a recap of the news, and I sort of lost a bit of interest in that and decided that I would rather do something that was a bit like a Sunday newspaper. So it's something that's a bit more laid back. It's a bit more something to sort of prepare you for the week ahead. It does do a bit of a recap of the industry, but there's also some articles in there that I think will pique interest with industry professionals, a bit of thought leadership, a bit on productivity, maybe a good book to read. And, and it's free. And you can subscribe at www.thebulletin.me or .me, and you will get notified of the new issue every Sunday.
I think it's great. And so today we're doing a recap of what was in 2020, but not only a recap of our TV industry in 2020, but kind of taking a step back and looking at the entire media industry. And I think it's appropriate that you are my guest because ultimately we reconnected because of this podcast. You had reached out to me and we ended up doing a networking Zoom. And you created the Bulletin, which is basically kind of like this. It's so 2020, right? Like either you're creating a blog or you're creating a podcast, but you did something a little bit different. You didn't do any of those things, really. It's kind of a blog, but really you focused on a newsletter that took a step back, looked at the industry as a whole, and also dived into a few reading recommendations. And you have this segment also called Diversion, which is like, basically, let's look at another industry completely and see how that can come back.
It's like the wild card. It's always looking at other industries like retail. I mean, every industry has been affected during the pandemic, so it's really interesting to look at what other sectors are doing and to see how maybe that could apply to something that I'm doing with my business in the entertainment space. I think that was really the objective.
Well, it's certainly become part of my weekly pattern now where I sit back, drink a cup of coffee and read your bulletin. So thanks for being here today. All right, let's get started. We're going to try to do a bunch of topics today and try to see if we can squeeze them all in within an hour. Let's start with the obvious, which is the year that was 2020. And when you and I spoke about this earlier, we talked about how we both traveled in January. You had traveled to Napi, Miami, as did I as well. And then you went off to London. I went off to Tampa Bay, ended up visiting my parents, ended up going to Disney World, figured I might as well give that experience to my kids. And boy, am I happy I did it just in time because everything is closed now. And then went back to Miami for Kids Screen. So, and that was it, and we didn't expect to be in the place we are now. We started hearing the rumors of what was coming, but nobody was really afraid. Nobody was socially distancing. And at Kidscreen, the closest they got is somebody had the genius idea of like branding hand sanitizers that they could give away to everybody. So that was like the first notion that something was coming.
Even at NAPTI, I mean, there was just no, there wasn't hand sanitizing stations. There was no procedures or regulations. The plane was packed flying down. And then I went to London, and it was sort of exactly the same. It was winter and the pubs were packed. And there was this definite sort of unease. You could sense that there was something, but we just had sort of no idea what was going to play out. And then, here when things started closing and the schools closed, we all thought that, well, we'll probably be back in the office in a couple of weeks. And I actually returned to the office in the summer to pick up some things. And it was the strangest scene. It was almost like, when the fire alarm goes off and everybody leaves the building, but they still leave all of their personal items on their desk. I walked around the office and there was still half-drunk cups of coffee and coats on the back of chairs and work that had been done and just left. It was a very, very strange reality.
Yeah, like a ghost town. Come to think of it, I used to work half the week in Vancouver at one of my clients' office. And I wonder if I left a half a cup of coffee on the table there. Luckily, I don't drink milk, so it might not be the grossest thing in the world.
There were some interesting things in the office fridge, I can tell you that. But this year is actually the longest year in 20 years I've ever stayed in one place, because I've always been traveling. I've always joked that Montreal is my play city, and London, New York, and LA are my work cities, because most of my work does actually go on in those three cities.
I mean, on the flip side, it's been kind of nice not to have to travel so much. The ironic thing for me is that I had told myself last year, okay, I'm going to slow down. It's not a crazy amount. I know there's a lot of industry players that do way more than me, but I think I was starting to average like 8 to 10 trips a year. And my kids were feeling it. I was feeling it. And it was too much. Like, you'd return and then in 2 weeks, you'd have to go again. So I told myself, I want to travel less. Well, that certainly happened in a big way, but I've enjoyed it. And my kids have enjoyed it as well. I mean, they told me that essentially if the one good thing about COVID is the fact that I'm at home with them right now. So,
and the international travel is tiring. I mean, I used to do, overnight trips to London, or, the famous red eye to Cannes, where I used to attend MIPCOM and MIPTV, and it makes you realize how exhausting those events really are. But then I think at the same time, we always thought that without these events, we wouldn't be able to function. But this year, I feel as though there's been more opportunity for connectivity than ever. It's proven that you can do deals over Zoom. You can still network. You can still reach out to people. But I believe that everything will return. Maybe events will be slightly different. I think there will be less events. I think there were too many events, and I think events that they really need to provide some value. But I think we will all be back. I think we all need to be doing deals in person again, hopefully soon.
I think it might be a mix, as you said, like we've gotten accustomed now to Zoom meetings and comfortable with that. I think that accelerated things to a great extent. I mean, we talked a little bit about this, how, Skype before Zoom was mostly to catch up with family and friends, especially when you're traveling. It was a great way to connect with your kids late in the evening when they're coming home from school in Montreal or in my case in Vancouver, then it'd be really late at night. But, so Skype was mostly meant for families. And I remember trying to do business a while ago, because I didn't always travel a great deal. So as much as possible, I tried to do Skype meetings, and it was really hard to convince people to be on video. Most of them would refuse and want a simple phone call. And, now fast forward to 2020, and we've got 4 or 5 or maybe more of these meetings per day. And with people that otherwise may have said to us back in 2019, no, I prefer a phone call or prefer in-person meetings. So I think we're going to see maybe reduced travel because, while budgets are going to be difficult when we launch back up, but also people will now have gotten accustomed to the fact that, no, let's just jump on a Zoom call rather than jumping on a flight to Toronto from Montreal. It's like we'll save ourselves an entire day of travel if we just jump on a Zoom. And then when it's really important, then yeah, we meet face to face.
No, I completely agree. To be honest, I'd never really used Zoom before. I'd never used Teams and recently switched to Teams. And most people that I spoke to early in March were not really set up. I mean, people didn't have the mic, or they just didn't know their way around. Or like you said, it was video conferencing was really about family, very impersonal. And then suddenly you've got to sort of make yourself look professional on the camera, and there's some teething problems. But I'm actually very glad that we have gone through this year. I think that productivity wise, it's been great. And for networking, especially in such a global industry, I think it's really important that there isn't those barriers of travel to mean that you can't do business somewhere across the world.
And ultimately, any crisis, it's like, peeling back the layers of what needs to be fixed. Like it changes your business. And by changing your business, and it forces you to look at, well, what's working and what's not working. And that's certainly been like a major aspect of my thinking this year. So, well, maybe what we're going to see this year is a hybrid mix, right? Where there's going to be less travel, and because people are going to be more comfortable jumping on a Zoom rather than even a Montreal to Toronto flight. That's a day's worth of work, as opposed to a quick jump on a Zoom for a half hour. So I think we will see things slow down a little bit on the travel front. But yeah, we're going to come back to it. The question is when. That we don't know. And that really depends on the rollout of this new vaccine. Now, that is a topic that everyone has heard about way too much, but it was the elephant in the room that I felt we had to address. If we're going to do a year-end recap today, we had to address 2020, the monster that was, or that is. And anyways, wishing everybody a good 2021, that's for sure. All right, next topic, systems and softwares. You have this email called hey.com. What is that all about? That's just yet another hack that's available to us online.
So I've been following the company behind Hey is 37 Signals, and I've been following them for, oh my goodness, maybe 15 years. They first came out with a solution called Basecamp, which is a product management platform, and then they had a CRM called Highrise, which I loved. Unfortunately, they stopped making it. I don't use Basecamp, but I've been following their founder, Jason Fried, and they came out with hey.com, and I was quite curious about how email could be reinvented. And what hey.com is that you forward all of your email addresses that you have, like my Gmail account, which must be 15 years old, and you forward all your email to your hey.com email address. And then when the email comes in from, say, somebody that you know, or somebody that it's a marketing email, one of those lists that you just never manage to get unsubscribed from, you either say, yes, I want to receive emails from this person, or you click no, and it will completely filter out any more emails from that company or that person. You'll never, ever see them again. And then the other thing is that if you receive newsletters that you do, in fact, want to read, you can add them to a different section called the feed, and it puts all of your sort of authorized newsletters in one continuous stream. So it's a really novel way, and I really like it. I mean, my Gmail account, every year I try and unsubscribe from all of these things, and it just never happens. And Hey's been a fantastic way to minimize my email, probably by about 80%.
Mm-hmm.
I thoroughly recommend checking it out.
Well, I will. And meanwhile, I've been using like other little apps like Boomerang, which is a great way to get emails bounced back to you. And of course, Gmail has so many built-in functions that once you start uncovering them, sometimes you don't even need to get these additional apps. Like the functions are right there in that kind of software system. And then Basecamp, that's one that I discovered this year. In fact, all those, like Slack is one system that I use with one of my clients, and Basecamp is another one that I use with another client from overseas. And it was interesting to see the different functions of all these things. I wonder if, we're even there yet. But then there was this big news like recently, like where Slack, I didn't even know it was a Vancouver-based software, but it is. And they ended up selling, or Slack, for 27.7 billion, not million, $1 billion to Salesforce. And I'm thinking of like, okay, I use it and it's a great tool to feel like, you can have some water cooler moments. You can quickly talk to your colleagues and it's great. But 27.7 billion, how is a messaging app worth that much money? Do you have any clue? Hypothesis?
I didn't have time to look into that at the weekend. And I know you mentioned it when we spoke last week. And I don't use Slack. I know lots of people in my company use it. It's mostly on the IT side. I always thought it was something that was used, mostly within a certain department or a certain sector. I just started using Rike, which is another project management platform. But I'm kind of curious to see what the link is between Slack and Salesforce, and to see why they would put such a huge valuation on it. Acquisition of users, potential joining of the two to create a new product. It would be very interesting to see what happens.
Well, I think it's probably definitely a joining of the two, because you've got all these functionalities that allows a team to talk to one another. And maybe that's not really, I don't have Salesforce, but maybe that's not really well ingrained. Like you can probably see what your teammate has done with a certain client because it's a CRM system, but is there a way for communication to flow freely? And maybe if you marry those two together, and sometimes when you look at all these softwares, you go, okay, well, so if I want to do that, I'll get this app, and if I want to do that aspect, I'll do this app. And then really manually you're like putting together like a pipeline for your work. And so there's probably room in the years to come for somebody to bring these softwares together and make it even more powerful. Like I'm even surprised that Google hasn't come out with a competitor of Basecamp and Slack or Rike. Like they have all the functionalities. They already have teams that come together to share like the Google Business Suite. So, and you have a shared drive and everything, but then there's no tool to communicate. So maybe watch out to see what Google does sometime next year.
Definitely, but you can't fault, the good old email. I think one of the biggest challenges of these platforms is that they aim to replace email, and everything ends up going through the platform. So I think for a lot of companies, this is a huge shift. But I think ultimately it could be that companies go with their own, maybe white label, their own customized platforms to manage clients and internal communication.
So we've seen a big jump this year with SVODs. Disney Plus launched last year, so it's not this year's news, but their growth was just crazy. And now we're seeing more and more pop up. What's your take on this?
This year has been an interesting year. Even at NAPTI in January, we were, everybody was talking about these new OTT services coming out. And I think the broadcast or the traditional cable industry felt as though they had a little bit more time to figure out the model. And that model, the window sort of went from maybe a 5-year to a 1-year in the space of this year. There's been huge growth in SVOD services, growth in AVOD as well. Even the FAST services, the free ad-supported TV, like on Zumo and Pluto, have seen, huge amounts of growth. I still think that there's definitely still growth for the large companies like Netflix and Disney Plus. Even though Netflix has slowed their growth in the US somewhat, I still think that there's growth in untapped markets, where countries like India, where more people are getting connected, there's definitely opportunities there. Also challenges that there's already established local players that have very, very niche and popular local content. So I think if you want to be a global brand like Netflix, you really are going to have to provide something unique in each country that you want to expand into. I read a comment actually this weekend that somebody was talking about whether Disney would actually merge Hulu and Disney Plus together to make one service. So that's actually quite interesting. I mean, really anything is possible.
But Hulu's a little bit, I've read this year that Hulu is a little bit disappointed with their growth potential because I, I feel like maybe they're being blocked to expand into other territories. Like Disney does not want them to do that necessarily.
Yeah, and if it's about numbers, maybe merging with Disney Plus could give them that additional boost. I mean, I think the other thing is that there is a challenge that there are too many platforms. So I think it's really important for these services to try to make it as simple as possible and to try and keep the subscribers within one service. I mean, going back to Netflix, I think the problem with Netflix is they only have one product. So the only way that they can increase their revenue is to acquire more subscribers. You know, unless you are continually increasing the price from your existing subscribers, you always have to chase the new customer. Netflix has recently increased their pricing, and I think they are confident that the subscriber will continue paying more and more, but up to what point?
Yeah.
I think there's going to become a limit where you just can't keep increasing the price. Do they start offering premium TVOD rentals within Netflix? I mean, Disney Plus have already done it. You pay a little bit extra to watch a new movie. Is that something that Netflix could do? You know, there's so much content that's available for rent on iTunes that is not on any streaming platform. You know, maybe there's an opportunity for them to offer Netflix subscribers, you know, you pay additional $3.99 and you get to see something a little bit more recent.
I mean, that might be the weakness of Netflix, is that they only have the one service. And given that I know you love to compare it to other industries, I mean, look at the banking industry over decades. They figured out that it's always best to lock people into at least three different products. Am I doing four here? Three. Three products to focus on, because then they know that the client retention increases the more products you have, because then it's not a question of just closing your account and opening up another one. You have to close your account. You have to change your mortgage over to another bank. You have a line of credit. You have a loan, you know, you have a savings account and so forth. So these are things that banks have been doing for ages.
And the cable industry as well. You know, you had your telephone, you had your internet, you had your cable TV, and you had your sports, you know, all these things that have changed this year. And so people are thinking, well, do I need this anymore?
But that's the model that Amazon have, right? It's like they really don't necessarily care about the content, maybe to a certain extent, but really it's about getting your membership, which gives you faster deliveries so that you spend more on their website. And the same thing with Disney Plus. It's a brand extension that continues. What a stroke of luck for Disney when you think about it, because this year they had to close down all their parks, but kids have continued to enjoy the Disney experience because of Disney Plus. And so in many ways, when they start over again, it's going to be a little bit easier for them to target and market the same audience, you know, and bring them back to the parks and their whole ecosystem of businesses for kids and families.
Yeah, I mean, that could be interesting. I always found that as a parent, Disney content was quite exclusive and it was almost a rarity. I mean, they used to release things on VHS and then you used to have to wait years for it to come out on DVD and then Blu-ray. And I know when they first announced years ago that they were thinking of launching a service, it didn't really make sense, because at the time you think, well, everything's on Netflix. Why would Disney launch their own service? But now with the amount of content that they have and the success that they're seeing, I think it's a very unique model for a very unique brand.
Yeah.
But you're right. It will be interesting to see what comes out of the success of Disney Plus this year and how it affects other areas such as parks and licensing and everything else that Disney is involved in.
So one question before we move on to the next topic. One of the stats I saw in one of your recent bulletins is that this year there was a 37% growth in SVODs and AVODs. That is a huge number, but at the same time, I don't know. I kind of thought maybe that would be higher. What did you make of that stat? Did you see it as quite high or not quite as high as you would have imagined?
I think there was definitely an increase in people exploring more on their television sets. I think people were looking for something a little bit different. I think that there was just more time for people as they're inside to explore other apps. I wouldn't have expected a huge amount of growth. I mean, if you think, there was sort of a period of time from March to June when everybody was still figuring themselves out. And don't forget the lockdowns were sort of going in waves. So even in the US, I don't think many subscription services saw an uptick till probably the summer, even early fall. And then of course, with the summer, everybody was outside. I mean, I really expect to see the uptick to be over the next 4 months. That's when I really believe the engagement will be going up.
Yeah, well, it is winter. The cold is coming, and I don't know if we're gonna have full lockdowns again, but definitely, I think we're going to continue to have these mini ones, or at least be a little bit less motivated to go out until there's a bit more production in society. Okay, now let's discuss in-person entertainment. So live events, cinemas, sports, you name it, in-person entertainment. That has taken a huge hit this year. We're both from Montreal. I used to work at Cirque du Soleil, so we know the story of what happened there. They had to close down back in March or April 44 different shows around the world, and ultimately it took 2 or 3 months, but they had to do a mass layoff of 95% of its staff. So that was huge. And then you look at touring acts like bands, musicians, they've had to all cancel their tours. If any live events have happened, they've been these kind of weird hybrid events where it's partly filmed and put online with audiences scattered and spaced out in venues. But even then, we hear the news every day. It's like, well, yeah, but the air conditioning systems can pass around the particles and whatnot. So it hasn't given a great deal of confidence for people to come back. And then again, stand-up comedians, actors, theaters, they're all closed and they're suffering. I don't know quite what the question is, Conrad, because it's just been such a difficult year. But yeah, what do you see coming down the horizon for live events? Like, how are they going to reinvent themselves? And maybe we can even use Just for Laughs as an example. They created the world's first online comedy festival and did it quite well as well.
I mean, honestly, I think for the live music and the arts, I think it's been absolutely devastating. I don't think that any recession or even technology would have done what COVID has done in 7 months. Culture and arts is important. It's extremely important in every country. And it's the backbone of culture, and it's a huge economic driver for tourism, and it employs an enormous amount of people. I mean, even on live music, it's not just the artist, it's all of the support that goes around it, the catering, the sound, the lighting, all the skilled technicians that have been working on this for many, many, many years. It's been terrible to see what it's done to the industry. But then there's been some changes where live streaming has suddenly picked up, and now we have over 100 companies. I think there's at least 100 companies out there doing live streaming. They're either doing independent artists or providing platforms for artists to sell tickets. There are bigger artists that are now doing live streaming events, and some of them have had a huge amount of success. But I do see the in-person event coming back, but I see that there's an opportunity for hybrid concerts where, yes, you will pay to go and see your favorite artist in person, but you'll probably pay a premium. I don't think that we're going to go back to packed shoulder-to-shoulder arenas anytime soon. Mm-hmm. But I would hope to think that there's an opportunity to have a live stream at the same time for those that don't want to attend or can't attend. And there are some people that just don't attend concerts, but would probably like to see their artist performing live. So I do think there's an opportunity for a hybrid model. On the cinema side, yeah, I don't want to upset a few people by saying this, but The cinema model has not changed really in decades. It's exactly the same model that they get first window on the film. You pay to go and watch, and then it appears, 90 days later. And it's been that way forever. It really hasn't advanced. And I think the pandemic was just a nail in the coffin. I do think that cinemas were struggling anyway. I think they were struggling, being sometimes the cornerstone of shopping centers. There was always a cinema there, which shopping malls are also suffering as well. I think that, the price of tickets and the concessions, it was just becoming very, very expensive for a family or an individual to go to the cinema. I think this is a great opportunity for the cinema industry to reinvent itself. I think that cinemas there could be less of them, and it could be more of an experience rather than just something that you attend. Maybe there will be smaller seats numbers, maybe you'll have private booths, maybe there'll be better concessions. There obviously will be a price to it. But I think, like what was announced this weekend with the studios now streaming the movies at the same time that they appear in the cinemas, I think that was inevitable. And I think that's a good thing. People will always want to go to the cinema, but I think that people will want to watch the film at home as well. So I think it's a win-win. It's a hard pill to swallow for an industry that's been around for decades, but I do think that things will work out for the better in the future.
Mm-hmm. I did allow my oldest daughter to go to the cinema twice this summer when cases were really, really down here in British Columbia. I wouldn't do that right now, even with the socially distanced seating. So normally my parents were snowbirds going down to Florida, but obviously not this year. But I went to visit them in Tampa for a week. I'm glad I did it because it allowed me to visit them before this whole pandemic started. But we did go to the cinema. We went to the cinema twice, and we're talking about like run-down suburban Florida cinemas that did reinvent themselves. And I was quite surprised. Like, it was, nothing fancy. You get there and and of course it's kind of they've got a budget model, and they had these really comfortable seats, almost like the nicest recliners you could possibly imagine at home. And you had much more space in between people. You had much more place for your cups and your food. So the experience was a lot of fun. So maybe that's one way we're going to see more cinemas changing themselves. It's not necessarily bigger and better, but maybe refurbishing some of these old cinemas so that there's more space in between people, that it's more comfortable. And dare I say, a little bit of a hybrid, because you wouldn't expect a reclining chair in a cinema necessarily. I mean, some of the bigger AMC cinemas have that model, but it went further than that. And so it almost makes it feel like your home cinema if you don't have the space to do it. And it gave that kind of experience. But at the same time, you're going out, you're buying popcorn, and you're having fun. So yeah, cinemas are going to have to be a little bit more innovative next year to bring people back in. But there is definitely hope.
The other thing is that big films, they're made for cinema. I mean, that's the director and everything about it is made with that vision that it will be on a big screen, with the sound and the effects and everything. Big budget films are not made to be watched on an iPhone, and I don't think they ever will. So I definitely see the cinema becoming more of the sort of experience that you really would want to have in a cinema, rather than the sort of the popcorn all over the seats and the people talking behind you. I think those days are over, which is probably a good thing.
I kind of wish we had quickly researched the purchases of flat screens, new TVs, because I did see a lot of, people buying televisions around March, April. Like, this is anecdotally, but I bet you there's a big increase. And I certainly question my old 40-inch Samsung television screen, thinking, should we go a little bit bigger? And for sure, it's not the same thing. We were just watching one of the new Star Wars movies as a family on Disney Plus a couple weekends ago, and yeah, it's you just don't have the full effect, even if there's zingers or anything like that, because there were a few in the new ones, but you just don't get the full effect as you would with all the sound and everything around you in a cinema. The next topic is the cycle of video game consoles and the recent launch of PlayStation 5. I don't know if we're going to talk a whole lot about this because I don't have a PlayStation 5 at home. I don't even have a PlayStation 4 at home. But one of the things we talked about is that the cycle is way longer than what we're seeing with smartphones and whatnot. And one of the things you mentioned to me on our last call is there's been a 7-year time between PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5.
Yeah, that really surprised me. My son has a PlayStation 4. I don't really follow a huge amount in the gaming industry, although, the whole Fortnite thing is absolutely fascinating, how that's changed gaming. But I was really surprised to learn that there's a 7-year cycle between the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5. I mean, you think about Apple comes out, it seems like, with a new iPhone every year.
Yeah.
And people just, quite happy to trade out. And you think about the cost difference, the iPhone is more expensive than the PlayStation 5. But yeah, it's 7 years, and it really comes down to the amount of technology that goes into making such a powerful device, and all the engineering, and it's also the games as well. Some of these games can take 4 or 5 years to develop. So there's kind of a lead time that you can't just launch a new console and not have all of these games ready for it. So a lot of this period is not only the development of the platform itself from a hardware perspective, but it's also making sure that there are games already ready to go when users pick up the PlayStation 5. I mean, yeah, the PlayStation 4 has been around for 7 years. When it came out, it had the Blu-ray player. And the other thing that we were talking about is, 7 years ago, there wasn't all of this streaming. And so the PlayStation really was just a gaming console. It was primarily seen as just a device that you play games.
With some ability to watch apps, but
yeah, some ability to watch apps, but it wasn't your sort of go-to thing for Netflix. But I was really surprised to learn that, in the last sort of year, 30% of all activity on PlayStation was watching video. So, Netflix and YouTube. So I really see the PlayStation 5 as possibly becoming like the entertainment hub for the family. So it does a bit of everything. It does the gaming, and it does the video viewing as well, and music.
Yeah. I don't know the psychology of why there would even be like, I would imagine there'd be an uproar if there was a new PlayStation every year. And my only guess on that is that, I'm not the type of person that will buy a new phone every year. I think that's ridiculous. But when it comes time to make that purchase, as I did actually in January, I buy the latest edition possible because you want that phone to last a good 5 years, as did my old one. But then once it starts getting slow, then you realize you need something a little bit stronger. But these PlayStations, they have built the reputation every single time, even starting with PlayStation 2, of having very powerful systems that had way more capability. So in some ways, I think they're selling on the trust factor, right? It's like they want you to pay $400 or $500 or $600 when it first comes out, but know that you're not going to have to buy another machine for like another 4 to 5 years. I think is maybe part of the sale, because this is not something, I have to get the latest edition. No, I just spent $500 on my kids last year. I'm not going to pay $500 again to get the and again, PlayStation, what can they do? They're, what little features are they going to add that's going to be meaningful in any way?
Interesting to see what the price variation has been on the PlayStation 4 over the last 7 years. But from what I recall, it never went down. They didn't devalue the PlayStation 4 even when the PlayStation 5 was announced. It's pretty much kept its value for the entire 7 years.
And if these computers are stronger than what they're made for today, then there's room for software upgrades and whatnot to keep it efficient over time. So obviously producers have had a hard time this year as well, because we can't just be filming freely like we used to. I thought it was really interesting when I saw I'm going to deviate a little bit here, but I thought it was really interesting when I saw Grey's Anatomy and their episodes this year. They're all filming with masks on because they're in a hospital. So they took advantage of the situation in order to continue their production of the season. So I thought that was quite smart. But meanwhile, a lot of the American producers have closed down. So I think this is reinforced what is happening in Canada right now, which is more productions in Vancouver and more productions in Toronto. Now, this is based off of a Hollywood Reporter article, and there weren't that many stats. And I think we won't know the official stats until next year once they start bringing it all in to calculate the total numbers spent in Canada for productions in 2020. But we've definitely seen a spike in anecdotally in these productions in Toronto and Vancouver. What is your take on that?
I think being in Canada, we sort of look at our own numbers and we think, well, how could anybody be out filming? But when you look at the numbers south of the border, it sort of pales in comparison. So, I imagine that Canada has suddenly become a very attractive place to move filming to. I don't know, are the regulations and rules lighter? I know that San Francisco and California has just gone into lockdown, full lockdown starting yesterday.
Yeah.
So is it slightly more open and the rules and regulations are not as strict as they are in the US for a film crew at the moment?
No, I mean, look, I have heard of more producers doing it, working, but that's production service work. But yeah, I think in Canada, we're much safer. We do have measures in place. There have been talks about, testing people and the actors and quarantining people if they're going to be in close proximity, everybody having to wear masks and they've worked things out with the unions. The details I'm not 100% sure about, but there has been proper measures in place for that. Okay, next topic, linear versus on-demand viewing. Go.
I do not believe that linear viewing will ever die off. And in fact, I think it will increase. I wrote about this in this weekend's edition of the Bulletin. The music industry went through the same thing. You had to listen to the song that the DJ chose on the radio station. And if you didn't like the song, you would switch channels and then you'd switch back 4.5 minutes later when that song had finished. If you wanted your favorite song, you'd have to buy the entire album to get the song. And then streaming came along and suddenly you could choose any song you wanted and you could just listen to it. You could choose any album on demand and just listen to it. You could create your own playlists. It was like what I call the shiny new toy syndrome for the consumer. But after a while, people thought, well, okay, I've made my library and now I'm interested in learning about what other bands are out there. And now I'm going to start subscribing to these curated channels on Spotify, because I really just want somebody to tell me what to listen to. And I want, maybe I want my choice and my programming to be a little bit more specific to my needs, but I don't want all this choice. I still want to sit back and just be entertained and listen. Yeah. And I think that's really what's happening with the TV industry right now. We went from having a small amount of channels on linear decades ago to having 400 channels on satellite. I can remember as a kid, one of your friends says, oh, we have 450 channels and you only have 250. And it was all about how many channels do you have? And there was just too much choice. And then streaming came along and suddenly we could go back to choosing what we wanted to watch. And we could say, I want to watch exactly this at this time. There are no ads, there's no disruptions. I can pause it, I can come back to something at a later time. And I really think that the streaming revolution is like the shiny new toy syndrome. Mm. And I think already people are going back to, you come home from work, you just want to lie on the couch and you want to watch something that doesn't require a lot of brain power or attention. You're not suddenly going to start a new season of The Crown. In fact, I still haven't got past season 1 of The Crown. But you're going to want to put something on that's familiar. You're going to want to flip on maybe an episode of The Office or Friends, or, some of the old classics that you used to watch when coming home from work, like, According to Jim, or in Canada, there was that series, Corner Gas. And it was just that very light sort of episodic comedy that you could just lie back and zone out. And then at the weekends, you would then watch something a little bit more intense. You might make a commitment to watch a film, or you might make a commitment to start a series. And I think that's going to continue. And I think that linear channels and linear viewing is not going to go away. I think there will always be a place for it in a consumer's viewing day.
I agree, but cable TV is still going to have to adapt with the times and find a way to make sure that linear programming is easily available online, and not just, on their website or on that app that exists on the different distribution platforms, but go beyond that. And when you think about it, like Pluto TV, they were one of the first digital online OTT channels that decided, no, we're going to create everything into programming slate and deliver a guide that looks exactly like your cable guide with
the EPG looks exactly the same thing.
Yeah. But so cable TV is going to have to compete with Pluto as they get stronger and better. And also, we were talking about how the different devices are also improving how they deliver content. So right now it might not on the device you have, and I think you said you had Roku, it might just be the apps that you access. On the device that I have, which is an Android device called NVIDIA Shield, it actually knows what I've been watching on Netflix, what I've been watching on Disney Plus, and can recommend to continue watching programming or recommend additional programming that I should watch based on the feed that's coming in from these different apps. And it's all on like a really clean home page. So we can use that, or we can also go straight to the apps if we know exactly what we want. So I think there's going to be a little bit of that. And in some ways, YouTube for me has replaced, because now it's on my television, it's replaced that notion of linear TV, because I'm just often watching what's being fed to me, what's being recommended to me. If I'm in that state, in that moment where I basically just want to relax, it might recommend a music video that I want to watch, or a funny clips video that I want to watch.
Then you end up down the YouTube rabbit hole, and 2 hours have passed, and you're still watching videos on YouTube.
It's not linear, but it's being fed to you in a different way. And that's why, cable TV is going to have to, these networks are going to have to find a way to integrate themselves online efficiently.
Yeah, and then there's always going to be the gap of the revenues. The same happened in music when physical sales were still 60 or 70% of music revenue. But streaming was coming along, and there was going to be that point where one wasn't making up for the loss of the other.
Yeah.
And from 2007 to quite recently, the music industry has suffered quite a bit because of that dip. Now 76% of all music revenues globally are coming from streaming. So I think cable is going to go through that period where there is going to be probably quite a few companies going under, and they're going to have to trim back quite a lot to make up for the gap, because streaming is not going to plug the hole for I would say another 5 years, but they have to make that transition.
Yeah. And then going back to the live event conversation we just had, the revenues are down maybe on the audio side, but they're also down on the concert side, which is these days just as important as the sale of recorded goods. Okay, let's wrap up our conversation today and conclude maybe in a fun way. There's something that you and I both noticed as we were watching CNN, as we were watching the news about this app, and that's the Calm app that was using CNN as a way to market their new relaxing meditative application that's available. And when we're watching the news, it's been an intense year, so it was kind of a smart move. And I definitely want your take on this one. But you're watching really horrible news about what's going on. This year has been unfortunate with COVID and the Black Lives Matter, situation,
Don't forget the presidential election.
and the presidential elections, which we won't get political here, but yes. And the presidential election, it's been an intense year for news. There's been a few other unfortunate events, and like this is what we're being fed, especially a cable channel like CNN, which has skyrocketed its ratings during the November month when we were seeing everything unfold politically in the United States. Yeah, we needed this moment, and it was it was relaxing. For a minute they would advertise and you would watch like the 15 seconds or the 30 seconds of break, and you would just experience what you will be experiencing on this app. I'm talking way too much.
No, it was it was just one of those things that when you think about it, you think, why, that just makes so much sense. Why would somebody not think about that before? Something like the Calm app, you would imagine that they would always traditionally market their product along, to people that are already into wellness. They would go to wellness websites, they would go to wellness magazines because that's their target market. But sometimes you have to go completely opposite, and you have to find ways to market your product or your service that aren't what everybody expects. The whole election with CNN was like the perfect opportunity for that. It was very sort of bittersweet, tongue-in-cheek, saying, yes, you're watching CNN and everybody's climbing the walls about the election results, but hey, come and download the Calm app and you can sort of get away with it. And actually, second to that, I noticed last week there's a outdoor clothing company in my home country in the UK called Volback, and they make really, really high-end clothing. I mean, they make this hoodie called the 100-year hoodie, which they believe can last 100 years, and they have videos of them trying to destroy it, and they can't destroy it. So this company, Volback, have been approached by all the premium department stores and retailers around the world saying, please, we want to stock your products. And Volback's refused. So what they did instead is they rolled out a competition to find the most remotest retail stores in the world. And they would only stock their products in these remote retail stores. So I think their first one was somewhere in the middle of Australia that you couldn't access by road. You had to fly there, and then you had to trek, and then you had to, sort of paddle across a river, and you could only buy this particular item of clothing in this store. And now they're doing it for other items of clothing like cold weather gear. It will be the most remotest retail store somewhere in Greenland or somewhere in Nepal that you have to hike a mountain to buy. So it was just this sort of classic example of not thinking, oh, we need to market our product this way because everybody else is, or this is what our customers or potential customers expect. It's definitely a way to think about how can we look completely opposite. And some people may say it's a gimmick, but it's a very interesting way to market that could be and bring recognition to your brand.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a gimmick, and it's a risk because you don't know if being that remote is just going to drive you into bankruptcy, technically. But on the flip side, it's raising the value by limiting the supply and building up the buzz and building up the demand. You're driving up the price exponentially. That was actually one of the strategies that was used at Cirque du Soleil, bringing back another topic we talked about, where they really limited sponsorships. And I think back then, I don't know if they've changed since then, but when I worked there, they had like one presenting sponsor and then like 3 or 4 official partners. And what that did is raise the value of that partnership because you would get more visibility. If you looked at festivals, the logos would look like you're looking at a pizza full of different ingredients, advertising your way. But Cirque took a more relaxed approach and limited the amount of people who could get involved, and that in turn that raised the value. So I think it's very, very similar, but even more and more niche and even more like remote. It's
I mean, the other thing that they could have done is they could have just made one prototype product and then just said, look, it's worth us just making a run of 10 items
yeah.
and putting them in the store in the middle of Australia, because the high chances is that people aren't going to flock to buy this item of clothing in a shop in Australia, but the amount of press that it will give for all of our other products on our website, it just increases the brand value.
Okay, so they do have products on their website. It's not like...
Oh, they do, yeah. They have lots of other things that you can buy. It's just certain items you can only buy at these hard to get to locations.
Okay.
Which I think is a genius marketing idea, because so many outdoor brands have gone from being, oh, this is the type of thing that you wear only on the hills, to suddenly becoming high street fashion. So Volbak's completely done the opposite and said, well, you can only buy this item of clothing if you go out into the wilds.
So you're going to do it, Conrad?
No, I don't think so. Although Australia is definitely on my list. As soon as this, everything is fixed and we can fly again, Australia is definitely a destination for me.
Yeah. Likewise.
How about you? What's on your list?
God, any travel. I'd like to just return to Cannes and go to MIPCOM in 2021 if that could be possible. Yeah, but there's a few other countries in Europe I haven't seen and that I love to go to. I'd love to go to Japan one day, Australia. Croatia is the country I'd like to go to in Europe the most. Talking about a comm app and really niche clothing, two different topics, but there's some similarities there. But I feel like the comm app is like the perfect way to end this podcast, and to end the podcast for the year, because the holidays are coming up. It has been a difficult year for everyone. So we do wish everyone a great holiday break. Take the time to, to relax and to meditate. If you're alone, make sure you try to see if you can get into additional bubbles if it's allowed, and be safe. Zoom with others. And if you're with family and your immediate family is at home, have a great break and enjoy the time with them. And maybe the comm app is just for you.
Okay, it's great to talk, Eric. Thank you ever so much for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Okay.
I enjoyed it a lot. Take care. And that was episode 7 of Global Vid. Thank you for listening, and thanks to my guest Conrad Buck and his newsletter, The Bulletin, as well as Nightwood for the theme song. Stay safe and see you next time.